Helen Keller's story is often reduced to one dramatic moment: a child, a teacher, and a word understood at last. But that moment is only the beginning. The larger story asks what communication made possible afterward. How did learning become education? How did education become writing? And how did writing become a public life devoted to disability rights and related social causes? To answer those questions, we need to look beyond the familiar anecdote and follow the documented choices, opportunities, and work that shaped Helen Keller's life. The point is not to dismiss the famous moment, but to place it within a much longer account of learning, authorship, and advocacy. Helen Keller was born on June 27, 1880. In February 1882, when she was approximately 19 months old, an unknown illness caused her to lose both her sight and hearing. The illness is sometimes identified in simplified retellings, but the evidence available here does not establish one specific diagnosis. Rubella and scarlet fever have been suggested, yet neither has been confirmed as certain. That uncertainty matters. A responsible account does not replace an unresolved medical history with a more dramatic or more convenient answer. What is documented is the change in Keller's life. After the illness, communication became extraordinarily difficult, and the work of education would require methods adapted to the ways she could receive information. Beginning with what is known, rather than guessing at what is not, gives the rest of the story a more accurate foundation. The next major change came on March 3, 1887, when and Mansfield Sullivan arrived at the Keller family home in Tuscumbia, Alabama, to begin teaching Helen. Sullivan's method involved spelling words into Keller's hand. At first, those movements could be experienced without necessarily being understood as language. Then came the episode that Keller later described in her autobiography. On April 5, Sullivan spelled water into Keller's hand while water flowed over Keller's other hand. In Keller's retrospective account, the experience helped her recognize that the finger movements represented the thing she was feeling. It was not simply a word learned by repetition. It was a connection between a sign and the world around her. An April 5 letter by Sullivan reported that Keller learned approximately 30 new vocabulary words within hours. That number should be understood as Sullivan's report, while the water pump episode comes through Keller's later autobiographical account. Together, these accounts document the importance of the breakthrough while also reminding us to distinguish personal recollection from independently corroborated evidence. The achievement was not the end of learning. It was the opening of a way to continue. Once words could connect experiences, further instruction could build on that connection. The story therefore moves from a single act of teaching toward an expanding process of communication. The breakthrough at the water pump is memorable because it gives the story a clear shape, a moment when a pattern became meaningful. But education did not happen in one afternoon. In September 1888, Sullivan brought Keller to Perkins School for the Blind as part of her continuing education and exposure to other children who were blind or deaf-blind. This step widens the story beyond the relationship between one student and one teacher. Keller's development involved continued instruction, interaction, and access to educational opportunities. It also shows why a breakthrough should not be mistaken for a complete transformation. Communication had to become part of an ongoing educational environment, with new settings and other people. The famous moment mattered because it opened communication, but communication then had to be practiced, expanded, and carried into new settings. That longer process is easy to lose when a life is summarized by a single scene. Keller's education was not a miracle that ended at the pump. It was a sustained process that continued beyond the family home. Keller's education continued toward one of the most demanding academic settings available to her. She prepared for Radcliffe College at the Cambridge School for Young Ladies, then entered Radcliffe in September 1900. 4 years later, in 1904, she received a Bachelor of Arts degree cum laude. The American Foundation for the Blind identifies her as the first deaf-blind person to earn a college degree. That distinction is presented here with the Foundation's attribution, because the evidence supplied for this script does not include an independent comparison of every earlier case. The larger point does not depend on turning Keller into a symbol of effortless triumph. College required sustained study, preparation, and access to information through methods that made academic work possible. Her degree showed what her education had become, not merely a response to childhood isolation, but a rigorous path into intellectual and public life. It also shifted the scale of the story. The question was no longer only whether Keller could communicate, but what she would do with the education communication had helped make possible. While Keller was still a Radcliffe student, her life was already entering print. The Story of My Life appeared in serial form in 1902 and was published as a book in 1903. The autobiography gave readers an account of her early life and education, but writing became more than a record of childhood. The American Foundation for the Blind reports that the Helen Keller archives contain more than 475 speeches and essays by Keller. The number is an archival report, and the supplied evidence does not explain how that total was counted. Still, it points to the scale of a public written record. Keller also addressed issues far beyond the simplified image of personal inspiration. The American Foundation for the Blind documents her support for women's suffrage and workers' rights, her identification with socialism, and her opposition to United States involvement in World War I as a pacifist. The ACLU identifies Keller among the group that formed the organization in 1920. The evidence supplied here does not provide specific speeches or a detailed account of her individual role in that formation, so those limits should remain visible. What can be stated is that Keller's public positions connected disability with wider questions about rights, work, political participation, and war. She was not only being spoken about as an inspirational figure. She was also writing, speaking, and taking positions of her own. That distinction is central to understanding her public life. Her education gave her tools for communication, and communication gave her a platform, but the causes she supported were choices that must be described in their own historical context. Her story cannot be reduced to a lesson about individual determination when the record also shows a person engaging with collective political and social questions. The numerical detail belongs to that source's account and is presented with its attribution. These later years changed the meaning of the childhood story. Keller's public life was not defined only by the moment when a word became clear. It included organized work, public communication, and sustained advocacy on behalf of disabled people. In September 1964, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Lyndon B. Johnson. A line attributed by the American Foundation for the Blind to Keller's 1957 book, The Open Door, expresses the direction of that life. I will not just live my life. I will not just spend my life. I will invest my life. The documented story is not simply about overcoming a disability. It is about communication becoming education, education becoming authorship, and authorship becoming sustained public advocacy for disability rights and related social causes. Keller's experience was her own. It should not be treated as a template for every disabled person. But her record does show how access to communication and education became the basis for a long public career. What is your main takeaway from Helen Keller's documented story? Share it in the comments. And if you would like more carefully researched stories about remarkable people and their public lives, subscribe to Sam and Cookie. See you soon.